Hello everyone watching this video in the future. My name is Joel and I recorded this in the past, and you are on Ask Joel. It's so good to have you be with us. I don't know why I'm using this weird guru voice, but it felt good at the time, and you're watching it actually in the future. This week we've got a question that's come up in a lot of different ways in the comment section on these videos, which essentially, though it's been worded differently in different places, is how do I interact / be friends with / talk to people who are living outside of the teachings of the Catholic Church. That might be people who are of another faith tradition. It could be all the way to somebody who is living in a way that is sinful or outside of what the church would say is the path to a fullness of life. And that's a really good question, because we live in a world where not everybody believes the same things we do. And so they live their lives not always the same way that we are striving to as people who are followers of Jesus and people who are following Jesus specifically through the Catholic Church, which has some teachings that have been handed down from Jesus and are maintained in the church about the best possible way to live and a way to live in freedom. And so naturally the question comes up, how do I interact with these kinds of people? What do I do? How do I hold my hands? I'm not even sure. And here's just some real simple things. First, you have to ask yourself, if a person is acting in a way that is sinful, what exactly does that mean? And I say that because sometimes people are engaged in behaviors that we're like, wow, like that person is partying a lot or taking drugs or doing things that are harmful, and that's like really bad. If somebody you know is doing things that are harming herself or himself, I think it's really critical that you step back and really be honest if you need to get an intervention for that person and help find them some help, especially if they're doing harm to themselves. Sometimes what a person is doing, while we might say, yeah, that's a sinful lifestyle outside of the church's teaching, is actually really harmful to them. And by simply saying, well, but they've got to live their life, they've got to make their own choices, we're actually doing harm to them as well. So if you know somebody whose sinful lifestyle is actually them harming themselves or harming others or engaged in behavior that is very self-destructive, you're like, I know they have a problem with alcohol, I know they have a problem with drug use, you need to find a trusted adult or somebody else who can help you talk to that person and get them help. So that's the first thing we've got to get out of the way. But let's talk about other things, like how do I interact with people who believe things differently than I do and engage in maybe moral behaviors that are different than the moral code I'm trying to live by. The first is this: be concerned, this is sound like kind of selfish, be concerned with your own holiness first. Remember that you are going to follow a path, and following Jesus, that calls us to a different type of lifestyle that not everybody's going to choose to live. And it can be very tempting when that happens to say, well, does it even really matter? Yes, it does. A life with Jesus is a life in abundance. He says that in John chapter 10, and I believe it. Sometimes that means that we're going to stand out because we're living our lives differently, but be concerned about your own holiness and fight the temptation to fall in with the crowd. The second thing flows right from that is, if you are hanging out with people whose choices are holding you back from becoming holy, you might need to make some difficult decisions and at least putting up boundaries, if not walking away from some of those relationships. And here's why. In the short term, that might sting, but in the long term, the people we hang out with, well, we become those people. I once heard somebody say, you're the sum of the 5 people you hang out with the most. Think about that. What does that say about you if you were to say, I am kind of the sum of the 5 people I'm around the most, their beliefs, their attitudes? That might at least give us all some time to reflect. That's not saying that we have to only hang out with people like us, but if there are people whose lifestyles are so radically different from yours and there's just not a lot of connecting points, especially in our faith, that is something you have to talk about. And the next thing is, maybe you have people who are having some connecting points, who are like, yeah, like they're people, we believe the same things about Jesus, we really believe some of the similar things about church, but we differ in these areas and they're living their life differently as a result. Those are great places maybe to have some conversations and to not be afraid of it. In those conversations, you don't need to be judgmental or condemning, but I think it's good to dialogue with people about things that they believe that maybe we might say, yeah, I don't know that that's the best possible path to a full life. And again, in engaging those conversations, do it rooted in love, do it rooted in care, be able to listen to what other people have to say, but also don't be afraid of sharing truth and sharing what you believe and why it's so important. Because the reality is, sometimes people act or behave in a certain way that's outside of the church's teaching because they've just never really heard the fullness of the church's teaching proclaimed to them. At least they've never had an opportunity to ask questions of it, or they've had it proclaimed to them wrong. So those are sort of the 3 steps. 1, if somebody somebody's engaging in a sinful lifestyle that is actually really, truly harmful, help them get help. If there are people who just you don't have a lot of connecting points and they're not helping you become a holier person and there's really nothing there, you may need to consider severing ties. And then if you have people who are living morally different than you, but you have connecting points, especially in the realm of faith, where you could start to have a conversation about some of those things, go ahead and engage that. But engage it respectfully and engage it out of love. And as always, I'll go back to it. Put your holiness first. Make sure that you are never compromising what you believe, what your beliefs are, rooted in faith and rooted in who Jesus Christ is, and make sure you follow that well. If you've got a question that you want us to answer on Ask Joel, leave it in the comment section below. Subscribe to Life Team so you can see your question get answered. Give this video a like and share it with somebody else who's maybe wrestling with, how do I interact with people who have beliefs that are slightly different or maybe really different than mine? And come on back here in the future, and we'll see you next time on Ask Joel.